Welcome to my sim racing journey part 2. Part 1 was interesting. I was perhaps a bit too ambitious when I thought that my first ever lap should be done in the absolute pinnacle of modern engineering, but I think it could have gone worse. We need to start smaller though, and slower. I decided to pick up Assetto Corsa, which is highly regarded as one of the best and most accurate simulators available, and figured we'll start from scratch here. I chose one car, one track, and made it my mission to learn the fundamentals. I needed something lightweight, relatively slow, but also agile to really get to grips with it all, so enter the Mazda MX5 or the Mazda Miata in the US. Small, light, front mid-engine, rear-wheel drive, and a max output of a little over 100 brake horsepower, it should be one of the easiest cars in the game to drive, especially considering I went with the stock version over the Cup model. In terms of the track, I went with the GP layout of Brands Hatch. I've been to Brands Hatch a few times with my dad and uncle and their race team for the MR2 Cup and the Nippon Challenge, but that was like 10 years ago, so really I was going into the track blind. It's quite short, not too complicated, but certainly challenging enough to give me some issues. One thing I am particularly conscious of is my reliance on assists. On a controller, it's somewhat expected to use assists, such as traction control, as there just isn't enough feel on a trigger compared to a pedal. That's not to say you can't be quick on a controller. I mean, Christ, look at Super GT, the man's rapid on a controller. But I digress. I don't want to get comfortable using a crutch to then have to relearn it all when I take it away, so I've gone with absolutely no assists. I know the MX-5 has things like ABS as standard, but I figure if I can be confident without it, then it's inevitably just another tool I can use should I feel like it. So yeah, no traction control, no ABS, no racing line, and manual transmission. This is all to try and get the most out of the car and be in as much control as possible, and look, on paper it makes sense. I know I spend a lot of time facing the wrong way in the footage, but especially with things like manual gearing, you can extract more power and really push the car compared to automatic. The first fundamental I focused on was shifting, up and down the gears, pushing the rev limiter, and really exploring the power bands of the MX-5. Eventually I felt comfortable changing gears based on the noise of the engine and the general feel of the car. I started with the clutch, but it was so alien to me with flappy paddles that I instead opted for auto clutch, so it operated like a semi-automatic, much like many higher end disciplines of racing. Then I focused on braking. There's no use in going fast if you can't even go slow. I wanted to learn braking points and how to avoid locking up. To do this, I locked up. Yeah, I slammed on the brakes, I went too light on the brakes, I tried slowing down into a corner later and later with more input and less input. Basically just trial and error of as many variables in as many different types of corners at all different types of speed over and over again. And again. Here I started to find the limits of the grip I had and roughly when to brake for the corners. The next fundamental I tried getting comfortable with was the racing line. I intentionally turned the displayed racing line off to try and force myself to discover it and see if there were lines I'd be more comfortable with. When you're racing, the ideal line is often not the one you can actually take. Learning to adapt based on my own positioning and speed is hugely important if I ever want to scrap with multiple cars trying to take the same line at the same time. I know we're a long way from that, but it's worth developing now, and also yes, I am aware that my lines are pretty shocking at the moment. So now we're in roughly the right gear, at roughly the right speed, on roughly the right line, we can just stamp on the throttle ready for the next corner, right? Not quite. The final fundamental I focused on was throttle control. Most of my spins were from getting on the power too hard, too early, or both. I needed smooth application of power to keep the back end from getting away from me. Controlling a snap loss of grip was particularly difficult for me, so when my Mazda started to go, it went. After a while, there were some corners I felt comfortable that I knew when, where, and how hard I could put the power down. It was important for me to wait until the car was straight before I got on the throttle, lest I end up looking like some knockoff Tokyo Drift film. Once I felt at least somewhat comfortable with the four fundamentals I looked at, it was time to try and string it all together. It went okay. I don't really have a benchmark for a lap time. I think the world record is about 137, 138, and that's in a cup car as well, so it was lighter and more powerful. Consistency was mainly what I was after, and it was tough to do. Laps where I didn't spin or come off the track were on average anywhere between 2 minutes 20 to 2 minutes 40. My fastest lap was 2:13, and I only came close to that twice with a couple of 2:15s. Now, I want to consistently hit 2:20 lap after lap before I push for 2:15, then 2:10, etc, etc.
Now, the apex itself is at this point here, as close to the inside curb as you can possibly get.
So it was at this point I decided that there isn't much more I can do by myself without progressing at a snail's pace, or worse, developing bad habits. I took to YouTube and started studying track guides. The most insightful video I found was from Yorkie065. The depth he goes into in his track guides is immensely useful, covering everything from pit entry tips to analysing specific curbs. His guide was engaging, easy to follow and very well developed, and I've linked it and his channel in the description. I can't recommend his content enough, so definitely check it out. Anyways, I studied his guide over and over, and I must have watched a 13-minute video upwards of 8 or so times before I took back to the track myself.
Turn 6, and our braking point is here just before the 50-metre board.
Conveniently, MX5 racing is rather popular, with multiple dedicated leagues and series in real life, from the Global MX5 Cup to the BRSCC MX5 Championship, and even some of the guys we used to race in the Nippon Challenge series were in an MX5. I found some full races online of MX5s darting around Brands Hatch to get an idea of how actual racers deal with the circuit, and it turns out that they also find turn 1 at speed a pain in the ass to get round. I assumed the understeer I was struggling with was just me, but no. T1, Paddock Hill Bend, is notoriously difficult for understeer, if you don't get your entry speed and line just right. At least I need to watch out for it even more now, and focus a little extra attention on nailing this corner. With my newfound knowledge, I took back to the track to see what I could do, and I immediately noticed the difference. I was more confident, and had a much deeper understanding of the fundamentals I'd set out to develop. I still haven't found a great benchmark for the stock version of the MX5, so I didn't set myself a hard target time. Sub 2 minutes seems like a nice number though, doesn't it?
Come here, girl. Go ahead, be gone with it. Come to the back. Go ahead, be gone with it. VIP. Go ahead, be gone with it. Drinks on me. Go ahead, be gone with it. What you twerking with? Go ahead, be gone with it. Look at those hips. Go ahead, be gone with it. You make me smile. Go ahead, be gone with it.
Well, I tried over and over again, and I just couldn't nab under 2:05.5. I'm not sure how far off the pace I really am, as like I've mentioned, I don't really know what a good time is. I remember I was averaging about 2.5 minutes before looking at track guides and such, and I managed to hit my best lap just the first session after. I've done about 120 laps across 6 hours or so, and I'm really pleased with my progress so far. A week ago I couldn't even do a lap, and now I can get into enough of a rhythm to string together half a race distance without an off-track incident, and all within 10 seconds of each other. At this point, I'm itching to have a race, but I still don't think I'm ready just yet, even against AI. Hopefully, once I'm 100% confident in the track and the car, I'll be able to pick up other circuits and quicker cars much faster. This is baby steps here, Monza wasn't built in a day, or something like that. And if you made it this far without being bored to death, then hey, how are you? Thanks for sticking it out, and if you also happen to be a professional race car driver, please leave me some tips in the comments. Comments and criticism are, as ever, happily accepted. I'm always looking to improve my videos. Oh, and don't forget to check out Yorkie065, he's an absolute gentleman and has some great content on his channel. Until the next one.